once you begin to understand what your leadership brand is, even if you don't actually share it with anybody, you don't like start walking around and saying what type of leader you are, it's going to fuel you. You're going to understand the why. So when you do raise your hand, when you do offer to give a presentation in front of the CEO and you're sweating bullets, you're going to know why it matters to have your particular voice at the table.
Welcome to Women Changing Leadership. I am your host, Stacy Mayer, and I teach you how to get promoted, get paid, and bring your whole self to the leadership table. I am on a mission to change organizations from the C-suite out because women are the new face of leadership, and we are doing it on our terms.
Hello, corporate badasses. Welcome to another episode of Women Changing Leadership. I am your host, Stacy Mayer, and super excited, as always, to be here with you again this week. About 9 years ago, I had a theory that if corporate women showed up more as a thought leader at work, then that would lead to more recognition, higher salaries, more easily accessible promotions, those types of opportunities that you don't have to advocate for. They just come to you. One day you go into work and they say, hey, we're going to give you a promotion. Wouldn't that be amazing? So I created a process, and it's been almost a decade now, where if you showed up more as a thought leader at work, then this is what you would receive. And it worked. It absolutely worked on so many levels. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about in today's podcast episode, is why this process works and how you can begin to implement some of it in your own life. And also, if you like this idea of having a win for win, which is that you get more recognition, higher salaries, higher titles, all the things that you probably already want out of your job to create that higher level of job satisfaction. And you also want to be known for something, then this process that I'm going to share with you in more detail today is an absolute no-brainer. But if you already know the process and you already know about what I teach, then I invite you to go to stacymayer.com/paid, where you can sign up for a paid intensive that I'm offering this Thursday only. Go to stacymayer.com/paid. And in the actual intensive, what we're going to do is I'm actually going to give you personally, not you as in you general, but you specifically, what are those main talking points that you can be known for? This is an interactive workshop. We're going to be actually coming out with our leadership brand by the end of the intensive. You're going to know how to answer questions like, tell me about yourself. You're going to know how to conduct 15-minute ally meetings and what in the world would you even talk about in these higher level conversations. All of those things are going to come out of this intensive that I'm teaching on Thursday that is meant to show you how you can begin to get paid for your ideas instead of the hours that you put in at work. So go to stacymayer.com/paid and join us this Thursday only. I hope to see you there. And in today's episode, I'm going to be giving you a little bit more background on why this process works so well, and also give you a few things that you can begin to implement. And then if you want to strategize with me personally, then come on over to the paid intensive on Thursday. All right. So what is this idea of thought leadership? I think when people think about thought leadership, what we immediately go to, besides like writing books and podcasts and things like that, is LinkedIn, right? So being seen as a thought leader on social media. So maybe you have a YouTube channel, LinkedIn, Instagram following, like whatever that might be. That's the vernacular of thought leadership that we've created over the last decade, and it's part of the normal environment. And I think that when I mention thought leadership to corporate women, they're like, well, I don't really want to do that. And rightfully so. One is because it's a second job. And for a lot of women, we don't have room for a second job. I want you to have success in your current role, not adding more work to your plate. And then the other thing is that it's risky, right? So putting yourself out there on platforms like LinkedIn have a double risk. One is that, it kind of feels very permanent and people will judge you, or people might see you, or let's say you're looking for another job opportunity and they search for you and then your name comes up and whatever it is that you care about, it's risky because you end up looking stupid, or you might feel like you look stupid and you don't want to come off that way. And I think the biggest risk is that it's going to piss off your current employer, right? And I think that's a good risk that you don't want to take, right? So you want to get very real on what it's going to mean if you start just willy-nilly posting on LinkedIn. And I don't want anybody to get fired on my watch, especially because they posted something on LinkedIn. All right. So we're using thought leadership in a little bit of a different way. And that's what I'm going to be talking about on today's episode. So how I define thought leadership is this ability to show up as a leader with thoughts. All right. So you are a leader that has ideas, right? Now, when I ask corporate women what they want, they often will say they want to be recognized for their ideas, right? So they want to get promoted. They want to have respect. They want to be included. Essentially, they want to have their ideas heard, right? They want to be able to share their ideas and they want to be asked for their opinion, right? And when that's something that you want, it can be very difficult and frustrating if that's not happening, right? So you have a job, you spend 60 to 80 hours a week doing that job. Maybe you even get paid quite well, but you just don't get to see the fruits of your labor. Right? You're just producing output. You're producing work. You're waiting to be told what to do. And for a lot of women, quite frankly, I think that they're smarter than their bosses. They have better ideas than their bosses. And it can be incredibly frustrating when executive leadership or your boss doesn't care about any of those ideas. So I'm here to eradicate that. So I use thought leadership with my clients to give them that influence ahead of time. Okay. And so that's really what we're talking about today, is that you are a leader with thoughts. You are a person who has ideas. So we already know that. You probably already know that. It's probably been the bane of your existence if you're frustrated with your job. You have ideas. You see things differently than other people, but yet nobody cares about it. So in looking at this idea of using and bringing your ideas to the table as a thought leader, as a person who has ideas ahead of time, then that's what we're thinking about when we're thinking about thought leadership. Like if you never even posted on LinkedIn, I don't care. You can if you want to, but I don't care if you do or you don't. You are a leader who has ideas. I do stakeholder interviews. So the women inside of my leadership table mastermind, as soon as we start a 6-month engagement, the first thing I do is I interview their boss and their boss's boss and whoever the heck else they want me to interview at their organization. And I create a baseline. Like, where are they today? How are they viewed by their leadership team in terms of their leadership abilities? What are the words that are being said about them at work? And then what are those areas of improvement? And the first thing that I notice is that every time I interview a senior executive leader, now most of these are men that I'm interviewing because most of the women that I work with also work with other men at higher executive levels. And most of these men have talking points. So they have already developed what matters to them as a leader. They have talking points. They have bullets. They say, here's how I make decisions. And sometimes I don't even ask for that. They're like, well, the way I think about leadership is ... right? And then they'll just start telling me. And this doesn't just happen out of the blue. This is something that they have crafted and put together and created a plan for so that they can, when the opportunity presents itself, actually say it out loud. All right. So every senior executive leader that I'm interviewing has these talking points. But then I look at my clients, and especially when we first started an engagement, and they don't have these talking points. Before we've ever worked together, they don't know exactly how to answer that question. I had a woman who asked me the other day, she said, my boss asked me out of the blue, what do you want to be known for? And I didn't know how to answer that question. And I was like, no way, we have to stop that. Like, I am on a mission to make sure that every woman knows how to answer that question. What do you want to be known for? In a way that actually matters, right? So I'll explain a little bit more of that, but in a way that matters to the other person who's listening, because we might want to be known for something, but then that might not be what our organization or our boss actually cares about. And so it's really cool when our leadership is very similar to what the company's mission is or what that drive of that organization actually is. And so when you can answer that question, what do you want to be known for? Then now you are instantaneously a part of the conversation, right? Can you see how this works? A lot of times you're having conversations with your boss and you're talking about work and what you did that week and what you worked on that week. But even if for 5% of the conversation, like less than 5 minutes of the conversation, you're talking about something about your leadership or some of the things that you've been thinking about in the world, even if it's only for a couple of minutes in the conversation, that is what that person is going to start repeating. Like if they hear this often enough, what you want to be known for or what matters to you or what values you have, then when they talk about you on your performance review or to their boss's boss, they're going to speak about you from that value-driven place. Like I want to interview them and I want all of the bullets that they say to talk about your leadership, not just that you're very responsible and you get your work done on time. So you see the difference here. And so that's what we're starting to do when we shift into this idea that we are already leaders with ideas, with thoughts. We are thought leaders. We have opinions. And then the question becomes, how do I begin to share those opinions so that I don't just seem like a walking billboard trying to tell everybody what to do? Not my goal at all. So the first thing that you're going to start doing or recognizing is that if you want to be seen as a thought leader at your organization, you have to pull yourself out of the weeds. Now, the thing that I like to remind women is that pulling yourself out of the weeds actually is not about time management. It's about communication. Now, I want you to be able to better manage your time. So if you're working the 80-hour weeks and you're swamped and you feel stressed and you're just working, and you can't imagine advocating for a promotion because you don't have any extra hours in the week, so how in the world would you work at the next level? I'm here to tell you, you can begin to change and shift your communication immediately, even before the actual hours that you put in at work change. So I say in this intensive, I'm going to be talking about how to get paid for your ideas instead of the hours that you put in. And you might still put in 60-hour weeks, but now you're going to notice that you're being included in the conversation. So the first thing that you need to know is that you need to pull yourself out of the weeds. Now, I want you to pull yourself out of the weeds from a time management perspective, but more importantly, also from a communications perspective. So I already talked about those meetings with your boss, and I want you to start to ask yourself, what percentage of that meeting did I talk about work? And what I mean is like my work product, check-ins, how often did I wait to be asked to present something? Was this just a task checklist going through our task report and all the things that I'm working on? You can even go back through your emails. Is it just like, yes, no, I did this, I didn't do this, or can you approve this? That's all work product, right? Those are the hours that you put in at work. This is like the delivery. And again, that is 90% of your job. For many of you, it's 150% of your job. Even at that vice president level, you have to work, right? You have to produce output. You have to have value that is directly associated with the organization. But then I want you to ask yourself, what percentage of those conversations did I talk about the vision? Did I talk about the way I think, the way I communicate, perhaps something difficult that you were working on at work that week? What percentage of the conversation was focused on something even higher level than what is my work output? Okay. And if that percentage is anything less than 5% of the conversation, so only 5%, and for many of you, it's probably 0%, I really want you to ask yourself, how can I begin to elevate it so that I'm sharing about my ideas? So let me give you an example. So there was a woman that I worked with, and she was a vice president of human resources. She actually reported directly into her CEO, and this woman knew everything about human resources, right? She belonged to all of these different human resources organizations. She read up on best practices. She was very skilled and very good at her job. She reported directly into the CEO, and because the CEO was very busy, oftentimes the CEO would give her a tremendous amount of autonomy, right? So these would be very quick check-ins with her CEO, only if she needed something, but otherwise my client kept everything to herself, everything that she knew, all the decisions that she was making, why she was making these decisions. And she was also a little bit of a one-woman show at her company, so she didn't have a ton of direct reports. So she was really doing all of it, right? So she had to do the work product, the day-to-day job, but then she also had to make these really big decisions. And then her boss was like, yeah, that sounds good. So she would approve them. So then my client felt happy about that. But the reason that she thought something was off and the reason that she hired me to be her coach was because she noticed that in the management team meetings, which by the way, she was the only VP in these meetings, everybody else was actually in the C-suite. So she's not getting paid or titled, at the level that she's actually operating at. But not only that, all of her ideas, questions, talking points got pushed to the final 5 minutes of the conversation. So it always got pushed to the end of the conversation. And so that was when she kind of woke up and was like, maybe I need some help here, because I'm really good at what I do. I have lots of ideas. I have a ton of respect, but I'm clearly not being recognized for those ideas. So it was just kind of a given that that's what she would do. Nobody else really cared about what she did, and that was that. So her agenda items would always be pushed to the last 5 minutes. Half the people would leave the room. Sometimes it would get overlooked and moved on, and they wouldn't even get to those agenda items. You see where I'm going here, right? So I was able to teach her to communicate with her boss, who was the CEO, about literally for 5% of the conversations, why she was making this decision. So that's what you're going to start to do this week, is you're going to communicate the why. Why am I making this decision this week? And when you can begin to communicate the why, you're showing up as that thought leader, a leader with thoughts, a leader with ideas, just in your day-to-day job. This is why I made that decision. Okay. And so when you start to do that, then people start to recognize you for those ideas as this CHRO level executive leader. So whether or not she's able to get promoted to the CHRO, maybe she gets promoted to an SVP level, but whatever it is, she's being recognized. She believes that she's operating above her pay grade. She's engaging in that way. She's building relationships across her C-suite and showing up more as this woman who has ideas rather than all of this work that I did last week. So you do the work. I recommend everybody do the work, but you have to show up as well, just 5% of your conversations, as somebody who has ideas, who thinks bigger, and who is making that bigger impact at your organization. So this is what thought leadership looks like inside of the corporate world. Now, this is where it gets really fun. So a lot of people are really, really close to the information at hand. And so this is why I love coaching, because when we can have a conversation about how I see you as a thought leader, how I see the value that you bring to your company, then you get that courage to actually say, because in her particular case, she attended all these human resource meetings and organizations, and she was actually the president of one of these organizations, and she just took it for granted. She was like, well, that's just part of my job. That helps me with my job. And I'm like, no, it matters for you to tell your boss that you're the president of this organization. If she doesn't already know that you're the president of this organization, you need to tell her because it matters. It says, hey, not only am I good at what I do, but I have opinions, but I'm tapped into the larger human resources community. And just like quite simply by sharing like, hey, we had a meeting last week of this organization that I'm the president of, she just sort of throws it out there. Then her boss like turns and it's like, what? Well, you didn't tell me that. And it's just like, oh, it doesn't matter. So this is why I'm doing the intensive on Thursday, is because I want you to know what I see matters, right? So a lot of times what you think matters isn't always what's going to set you apart in terms of your ideas. Also, it's very difficult. It can be very difficult to really identify what your leadership brand is. And this is something that I'm very skilled at pulling out of people. And once you begin to understand what your leadership brand is, even if you don't actually share it with anybody, you don't like start walking around and saying what type of leader you are, it's going to fuel you. You're going to understand the why. So when you do raise your hand, when you do offer to give a presentation in front of the CEO and you're sweating bullets, you're going to know why it matters to have your particular voice at the table. So being able to articulate these different ways, whether it's to ourselves, sharing it with other people, is literally the answer to having success at the C-suite, right? To having success in those higher level executive leadership positions. I'm going to go back and remind you to the beginning of this conversation. When I hear these executive leaders, when I'm having these stakeholder interviews and I'm hearing them talk about their leadership and how they got there and what their path was and what matters to them and how they make decisions in such a clear, direct, decisive way, I ask myself, which came first? So is it because they're in the C-suite that now all of a sudden they have these opinions and thoughts? No, absolutely not. They had these opinions and thoughts. They understood who they were, what they stood for as a leader, and then they got promoted to the C-suite. Absolutely. And I know this for a fact because sometimes I'll ask them, I'm like, did you always think that way? And they'll be like, well, when I was a director, I really realized I had to start to elevate my executive communication skills. And then that's when they started to recognize that. So that's what I'm offering. That's what I'm inviting you to do as a woman who not only wants to get paid for her ideas instead of the hours that she puts in at work, but is capable of getting paid for the ideas and not just the hours that you put in at work. Now, here's where it gets really fun, is that my clients will, a lot of them, I say a very, very high, over, 60% of them will experience a promotion as a direct result of this elevated communication. And then the remaining 40%, what they do is they get so confident and they understand so clearly how underpaid they drastically are that they go out and find themselves another opportunity. A lot of times, sometimes people will meet a client of mine and they'll think that they're a vice president. And I'm like, well, they're actually only a senior director. And they're like, no way, that's crazy. They totally seem like they're running a 200-person team. And I'm like, yeah, I know. And they're applying for VP level roles and they're being included in the conversation at that vice president level. And so what ends up happening very quickly is they go out and they find themselves that VP level job, that VP level salary. You also give yourself that career longevity, right? When you can't be replaced by a robot, when you have those leadership ideas, those leadership principles, they know the value that you in particular bring to the organization. Lots of leaders know, not just your boss, but many leaders at the organization know about the value that you bring. Then you make yourself in a good way irreplaceable at those higher executive levels. And it makes promotion after promotion no-brainer. And I did just get this. I can't remember if I shared this on the podcast, but a few weeks ago, I got a Slack message from one of my clients who said, guess what? I got a promotion out of nowhere. And what she meant by that was it wasn't performance review time. She hadn't advocated directly for the promotion. She walked in, her boss said that he wanted to meet with her, and he said, we're giving you a promotion and a pay raise off cycle. And it definitely wasn't out of nowhere. She knows exactly the process that she took. She knows how she started showing up as that higher level director, and she got rewarded as a result of it. If this is interesting to you, let's dive deeper. I want you to have those talking points. I want you to know what makes you stand out as an executive leader. What is your sweet spot? What can you begin to share and without sounding goofy or arrogant or like I'm just like self-promoting? I want you to have the courage to first understand and articulate your own leadership style to yourself so that then you can begin to share that with those people around you. And especially if you're interviewing for executive level roles, you want to have these talking points and you want to understand how you can begin to articulate this and say it out loud in a way that actually matters to them. Because a lot of things that matter to us don't matter to our executive leadership and vice versa. And I want to change the script because you are amazing. We need you at the leadership table. And my mission is to get more corporate badass women like you into executive leadership so that we can change the C-suite from the inside out. Thank you all so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to Women Changing Leadership with Stacy Mayer. If you enjoyed this episode, you are absolutely going to love and benefit from the work that we're doing inside of the Women's Leadership Accelerator. This month-to-month membership program is unlike anything else in the market. We are single-handedly flipping the unemployment rates on their head. It is the only place on the internet where you can actually get yourself not only a job offer, but one that has a higher salary, a higher title, and more recognition and influence than you ever could have imagined in your career. Inside the Women's Leadership Accelerator, we are getting women promoted. We are getting them multiple higher level job offers. And I want that to happen for you. Join us in this one-of-a-kind program. You're going to get coaching directly from me, my executive mentors who are also hiring managers who are doing the work, who have worked with me personally for the past 3 to 5 years. We are here inside of this accelerator program to work with you personally to begin to elevate your leadership to that next level. This is exactly what you have been looking for, and I am here to deliver it to you. Best thing. It's month to month. So you can come in, join us, get access to all of my training materials, my weekly live interactive calls, and you can begin to bring your friends into this community. It is the most corporate badass community on the market. I can't wait to see you in there. Go to authenticallypowerfulwomen.com. We are changing the face of the leadership table one promotion at a time. I can't wait to see you there.